We were all born too late to discover new countries and too early to travel between galaxies, but we live in the perfect moment in time to play the tactical milsim LARP simulator, mostly known as Squad. If you have no idea what this game is about, or if you're on the fence about getting it, I'll try to convince you on why you should get it, as well as some of its alternatives. But what exactly is Squad? It's a tactical shooter that's set in modern day on large maps that can hold 50 people per team with combined arms, and it has a huge emphasis on communicating, which can vary depending on who you play with.
Excuse me, what did I do?
Because you're not following orders, over.
But you also have to coordinate and ensure you're following orders and performing the task you're told or supposed to do. And by doing all these things, you can conquer the enemy team. Now, Squad isn't cheap, especially in this economy, which is why I want to share today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by War Thunder, which is a free vehicle PvP combat game on PC and console that sports over 2,000 tanks, helis, planes, and boats that are incredibly detailed. The game incorporates vehicles that date back to the 1920s, and you can progress all the way up to present day. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you're more into slower paced and tactical gameplay, and you can indulge yourself in the simulation and realistic game mode. But if not, there's always the arcade game mode if you want to switch off your brain and have heaps of fun. The game has one of the most dynamic and detailed vehicle damage modules that you can see with the help of the X-ray damage indicator. You don't have any of that hit point nonsense, but me personally, I like to stay in World War II, and I'm not trying to start any arguments of what the best tank was back then, but I love my T-34-85. It can take a hit, but it also packs a decent punch. I want you to download War Thunder for free on console and PC with the link in the description and top pinned comment, because if you do, you get a free large bonus pack that includes premium vehicles, premium account, and lots of boosters and many more. Back to the video. In Squad, you have a nice amount of factions to choose from, and most of them are unique in their own right, implementing real-world weaponry and vehicles. I will mention a couple that I personally like to play as, and to start off, you have the US Marines and US Army. I never really understood why the Marines are called Crayon Eaters, because I thought being a maritime land force would be fancier than the general army, but I'd like some clarification on that. You've got Russia and the VDV forces, which is cool because they implement some really interesting weaponry and vehicles that I like, but in tune with real life accuracy, the vehicles sound like a 1970s Lada, and when the VDV were first implemented, this person couldn't believe this about the anti-air platform.
But why? This thing's literally mounted on logs. See? Wood. Logs.
Look, the budget cuts haven't been kind.
You've got the PLA and PLA Navy, which is fantastic for me as an Australian who gets to roleplay the unpleasant future because the Aussies are also in the game, but I just love how in this game, each faction has deserts and woodland camo variants, but the PLA Navy throws it out the window because you're stuck with the blue camo that stands out so much in the woodland, but they do have a nice rocket launcher which tells you how fast something is. Now, in the next clip that you're about to see is exactly why having that laser rangefinder is extremely important to me.
Fucking shoot the dog! Yeah, but you really think they're fucking capable.
Don't put me under pressure.
Yeah, but are you? Yeah, mate. I've been pushing it this whole fucking time.
But the rifles I'd say are possibly the worst in the game, and I don't find them that much different to the PLA army, even though the vehicles and the camo scheme is very different. But you also have the Middle East Alliance, which is my personal favorite faction in the game. Their vehicles aren't the best, but the T-72 is just sexy, coupled with the G3 being a prominent weapon that hits extremely hard. But even though it isn't explicitly stated what faction it's based on, I imagine the Middle East Alliance is based on Iran and its pro-Iranian allies in the region, since the faction is made up of a lot of weaponry that those countries uses, as well as Soviet tanks and vehicles. Since you do have the G3 which Iran uses, as well as the Soviet vehicles that Iraq used before they, got annihilated, but I would like it if they implemented some AKs or even other Soviet weapons. And the last last two factions I'll mention are the insurgents and irregular militia. Sure, you might want to play as a proper army, but these two are, in my opinion, the funnest factions, and the destructive power of a VBIED should be taken extremely seriously, as it can wipe out a whole block of people. And you absolutely do not want to be caught outside when a BM-21 is firing off a load, since they can be very traumatic, albeit cinematic. I hope in the future they implement more asymmetrical factions, maybe an African one. It's totally not because I want to recreate Black Hawk Down in East Africa. The gameplay of Squad is a pretty big commitment, not the same as a competitive game of Counter-Strike.
No way he wins
Did I
this.
hit it? Did I get
no way. No way you won that.
But in the sense that you might not enjoy it at first because of how overwhelming it can be. And honestly, my advice right off the bat is, yeah, buy Squad, and if you don't enjoy it after one game, you can always refund it. Otherwise, if you don't want to spend the money on it, you can always play Project Reality. I'm not going to go too in depth, I've made a separate video on that. But in the gameplay mechanics perspective, I'm not going to get into a debate about it, but they are fairly similar, and if you enjoy Project Reality's gameplay, then you'll most likely enjoy Squad's gameplay. But that's mostly my advice to someone who hasn't played either game and to try them out. But once you dedicate yourself, it has led to some of the most entertaining, butt-clenching, and overall rewarding experiences. And this all depends on what game you're coming from, such as a small-scale tactical shooter like Insurgency, or a very casual game like Battlefield. You need to throw out the notion of individuality, because if you run off and do your own thing, for starters, as a new player, you're going to be outgunned in almost every situation, which then leads you to complain that this game is a walking simulator. Leading on from that, by doing your own thing, you won't help the squad leader build hubs, which are the main team spawn location, which leads to a lack of spawn points, meaning you need to run further to the action, leading you to calling it a running simulator. Lastly, if you run off and ignore your squad leader and mixed in with no knowledge of how the maps flow, you'll just keep running and running, and it'll lead you to call it a, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. But I cannot stress enough how important a microphone is to ensure teamwork, and it also drastically improves the enjoyment out of the game. If you only have $100, for starters, the money could be better spent on food, rent, or anything else, but seriously, spend that money on getting a microphone and save the rest for when the game's on sale. But staying on the topic of mics, the range of people you meet can vary drastically, for good and bad. There will be times where you meet people that are total mutes and treat the game like a free-for-all. You'll meet people that like to roleplay as the army they're playing as, and you'll have the people that, yes, can take the game a little too seriously, and as long as they don't have a hissy fit and get abusive, I find people that are extremely dedicated to working as a team to be some of the most fun that I've had in a long time, because following the orders they're giving and having a successful outcome is just so rewarding, and you feel like you as a squad have achieved something to help the team. What I'm trying to say is that this isn't the kind of game where you can switch your brain off. You have to be attentive and aware of what's happening, but obviously that doesn't mean you won't have fun and a laugh.
Oh my god. Oh my
It's a
god.
friendly helicopter, you know.
Mate.
Where did you learn how to fly on the back of a cereal box?
Hey,
I
fuck
don't,
you guys shooting a helicopter down for.
I don't condone that. Just obligatory.
Too good of a shot.
You gotta admit, that was a
No,
good
that was
shot,
perfect.
but
He's skilled.
I don't condone that.
Yeah,
That's not funny. That's actually not funny, seriously.
Because there is no progression, no leveling up, and the only reason why I like to achieve such a high score, especially when it comes to capping, is really just for bragging rights. When this leaderboard comes up at the end of the game, I like people to know that, you know, I did a lot to help the team. Because you could go off, get as many kills as you want, like 10, 20 kills I consider a fair amount. In the grand scheme of things, where each team is like 300 tickets, it's not going to have that much of a positive impact impact for the team, opposed to someone who gets 0 kills but was capping every objective, building spawn points and following the squad leader's orders. They'll have a much bigger impact on the team's success than the person that's playing purely for kills. But I think I should mention the gun handling, and we got to separate realism from difficult. Is the shooting mechanics in Squad realistic? No, but they're more advanced and difficult to deal with compared to more casual shooters. The way the gun moves around the screen, the recoil, and the fact that the bullet comes out of the barrel and not the center of your screen makes it much harder to camp in some locations and just pop heads, which I'd say is comparatively much easier in a game like Hell Let Loose, which people consider a Twitch shooter. In Squad, you have many different roles, and while some might be tedious, they can drastically affect the outcome of a game. For some reason, there's an unarmed role. I just love how the wiki says it's a troll kit, and when I was first starting out, I just wanted to see what it was like. Just for point of reference, yes, the enemy team will still shoot you on sight even if you're surrendering. But you have your standard roles that can deal with vehicles, you got a medic and a machine guns that can lay down constant fire support. But from a gameplay perspective, there's more than these roles. What I mean is that sometimes you might have a team that is completely disorganized and you're the only squad with cohesion. You'll have to play less aggressive by getting spawn points, which are the HABs setup, building fortifications and staying on the defensive points. I hate it because sometimes you just want to get out there and shoot people, but if no one takes up this role, you're just going to get steamrolled. And in the gameplay that you're seeing, our squad put up such a valiant defense on the mosque, repelling hordes of Americans, dying and trying to retake the point. We lost the game, but we knew that by working as a squad, we made it as hard as possible for the enemy team to win. And even though we lost, it just felt so rewarding. Sometimes you might have to become a literal digger and spend half the bloody game digging and building things. Other times, if you feel like taking things easy, you can play American Truck Simulator's Iraqi expansion by doing logi runs. I don't know what it is, but even in Hell Let Loose, there's just something so satisfying driving a truck, listening to some good tunes, and keeping the boys well supplied. But the most fun you'll have is playing aggressive, obviously because that's where all the action is. One game we got dropped off by a heli at the first point of the enemies to try and delay the capture, and they went the whole game not capping it. It was one of the best games of Squad I've ever had, but each squad can be broken down into fire teams, and this can be utilized really well by a competent squad lead. Overall, on the surface, it might seem like pick a role, run towards the enemy, shoot, die, rinse and repeat, but depending on who you play with, how you play the game can drastically vary. But in the end of the day, you are just a cog in the machine that keeps your team functioning and fighting for longer. But moving on to graphics and atmosphere, when it comes to Squad's graphics, they're nothing impressive. I do wish they'd make an effort to fill some of the empty interiors with furniture, similar to what's done in Hell Let Loose. I know the environment, especially in urban areas, isn't the focal point, but I wouldn't mind some environmental storytelling. Insurgency and 6 Days in Fallujah did it really well. It felt like a lived-in place where people actually were, and it's now become a battlefield. It's a minor thing that I hope they work on in the future, but in the atmosphere department, Squad shines when it comes to explosions and eventually suppression when the infantry combat overhaul goes into effect. More on that in a second, but being under artillery fire is just so cinematic and cool, and it creates pandemonium. But before I end the video, I have to mention modding and the infantry combat overhaul. Squad has a couple of cool mods that are ran on custom servers. Some of them include the Middle East escalation that adds many more maps, factions such as Iran and many special forces, and it also affects how the gameplay is. If you want something more futuristic, you can play Squad's Star Wars Galactic Contention mod. Even though I'm more of a Star Trek enjoyer, that's just how I was brought up, don't abuse me please. But these mods I imagine are getting hammered pretty hard because of the recent updates to Squad and the looming infantry combat overhaul that sets to make shooting and being shot at much more difficult to deal with, and every couple of weeks anyone has the privilege to try it out and give feedback. I believe this will be very good for the game and I've been absolutely loving the playtest. But to conclude, Squad is a fantastic game that I recommend you pick up. If it's too expensive, I also recommend you try Project Reality if you haven't already. But once again, I want to thank War Thunder for sponsoring today's video, and don't forget to click the link in the description and top pinned comments so you can create a War Thunder account and receive lots of bonus loot in game. Anyways, I'm going to end today's video there because if you did enjoy it, please do consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing the video with your friends. Anyways, my name is Tan2 and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.